Hello, I'm a nerd named Ryan. Let's talk about Daredevil from 2003. The Daredevil was released in 2003, and it's one of those movies that was kind of made to sort of capitalise on this resurgence in superhero movies in the early 2000s. Basically, around the sort of late 90s, a lot of interest in superhero movies had died down, mostly due to the release of Batman and Robin, which a lot of people didn't really like. However, in the year 2000, Bryan Singer made the first X-Men movie, which was a big success, and then 2 years later, in 2002, we got the release of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, which was an even bigger success. And so around the time Spider-Man came out, a lot of other studios were started making superhero movies to try and capitalise on the success of, you know, this new kind of interest in superhero films. You got movies like The Fantastic Four, you got things like Ang Lee's Hulk, and we got Daredevil, written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, and starring Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock. This is a movie that gets a really bad reputation these days. A lot of people seem to remember this as being a really terrible film, and listen, it is flawed, we'll get into that. I personally think that this is a seriously underrated film, and I really, really like it. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as people say it is, so let's talk about it. Now, even though it doesn't say it anywhere on the case, this is in fact the director's cut of Daredevil. The theatrical version is about 100 minutes long. This is just over 2 hours, about 2 hours and 10 minutes. So this is about half an hour longer than the theatrical cut, and it has a few more kind of dark moments, a few more character moments, really fleshes out the darker tone of the film that the movie was going for. And it also has an added subplot with a character played by Coolio, who is accused of murdering a prostitute. And that subplot's really interesting because you kind of see how Matt Murdock's superpowers work in a more kind of detective sense, almost, in more of his kind of in his day job as a lawyer. So that's a really interesting subplot. But we'll get into stuff that I really like in the film and some stuff that's not so good. So we'll start with the negatives in the film, because there are some. You know, I like this movie, but I think there are some negatives that need to be addressed. First of all, the film tonally is kind of all over the place. You know, at times it's trying to be this very dark, very serious, brooding superhero movie, almost like a crime drama in a way. And then at other times it's, you know, very sort of goofy, very silly, very over the top, in a very kind of comic booky way. So I think tonally it can't quite get the balance between, you know, light-hearted, funny moments and silly moments, and also kind of dark, brooding, serious, you know, angsty moments. So I think that the tone kind of isn't great. Now, the director's cut doesn't have this problem quite as much as the theatrical cut. The problem is still there, absolutely, but I think, you know, a lot of the extra scenes add kind of a few darker moments to the story. So it really kind of does give it a bit more of a dark feel than the theatrical version. But the tone is still a big problem for me. There's also some bits in this movie that are just really, really dated now. This movie, like I said, this movie came out in 2003, and you watch this film and you're like, this is a very 2003 movie. Like, this has 2 different Evanescence songs in it, for God's sake, right? Like, there's a bit where, you know, we're at the funeral of Elektra's dad, and they're playing My Immortal, and then a little bit later, Elektra is doing her kind of training montage, which is mixed with a suiting up montage for Daredevil, and it's all dark, it's got like a blue tint over it, and you just hear Bring Me to Life playing, because of course you do. That's the most 2003 song you could have picked for that scene. It's really silly and it really kind of dated, but I kind of love it all the same. Like, it's really kind of nostalgic for me. I'm like, oh, this is just pure distilled 2003, and I love that about it. That's the other thing as well. A lot of the film has either this kind of dark blue sort of tint or a kind of murky green tint, similar to what you see in like The Matrix. Very much a kind of Matrix colour scheme with the blue and the green tints and like camera filters and stuff like that. So that's another kind of element of this movie that I think hasn't aged particularly well. Also, my other real kind of big negative of this movie is I really hate the romance. I really don't think the romance is any good at all. You know, I think, for one thing, I think Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner don't really have very good on-screen chemistry, and I think the dialogue and the scenes with the romance. It's just really awkwardly written. And this was kind of a thing in quite a few of these like early 2000s superhero movies. Like, I think as well you could kind of argue that the Spider-Man one between Peter and MJ is kind of awkward as well. But that movie, I would argue, gets away with it because Peter Parker is just an awkward character anyway. Like, he's just this awkward nerd. So they kind of get away with it in Spider-Man. Whereas I don't think they do here with Matt Murdock and Elektra. I think all the scenes with those two are just really kind of corny and really sort of cheesy. So not a big fan of that, especially the park scene. Like, there's a lot of stuff in this movie. There's a lot of goofy shit in this movie that I can defend. I have no fucking defense for the park scene. It is bad. Where they're basically flirting with each other, but also having like a kung fu fight. And it's just so weird and out of place, right? And they're doing like one-liners at each other. We're like, is this just what a guy has to go through to get your name? Hey, you should try asking for my number. I'm like, what are you doing? What is this? Why are we doing this? Why are we here? Right? It kind of reminds me of the basketball scene in the Halle Berry Catwoman movie, where I'm like, this is preposterous. Why is this here? What are we doing with this? So there's a lot of stuff I can defend in this movie, but that scene for me, a little bit too goofy, and the love story overall, not a big fan of. Although I think it comes good at the end with the stuff on the rooftop with Matt Murdock, with Elektra, and with Bullseye. I think that stuff works pretty well. That's really the only time where the kind of the love story kind of works okay for me, with the romance kind of works okay for me. Otherwise, I could have done without it. Now, despite having all that stuff that I don't really like in it, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that I really, really adore. As I mentioned, I really like the subplot here in the director's cut with Coolio. I think that's a really cool idea, because we get to see Matt Murdock use his superpowers for more of his kind of day job rather than his superhero stuff. I quite like the origin story stuff at the beginning. Like, this was actually my introduction to, well, I'd seen Daredevil in like some of the cartoons, but I'd not really seen Daredevil's kind of origin story until I watched this movie. So I really like how they did the origin story bit. I think that was quite good, quite well done. I really like a lot of the casting in this movie as well. Like, you've got even like kind of in the smaller roles, like Jon Favreau is in this as Foggy Nelson. And listen, his Foggy Nelson, he's basically just doing what his Happy Hogan would end up being. Basically, if Happy Hogan was a lawyer. But he's really good at that, and I think he and Ben Affleck are good together as like a double act in the scenes where it's Matt and Foggy kind of just having a back and forth, having a bit of banter. I think they work really, really well. I think Favreau is just so naturally good at these kind of comedic sidekick roles. He's really good. Liked him a lot. I really like both the villains as well. So first off, you've got Colin Farrell as Bullseye, who is just so delightfully over the top. Like, Colin Farrell in this movie is like, he is wild. He is having such fun, clearly. Like, Bullseye's introduction scene is just hilarious to me, because Bullseye's Irish, right? So they introduce him. He's in the pub playing darts, and there's a song playing on the radio or on the jukebox or whatever, and the song that's playing is by House of Pain. It's called Top of the Morning, and it starts with the line, "Yeah, I'm Irish, but I'm not a leprechaun," because this is a 2003 superhero movie, so fuck subtlety, I guess. It's just so, I don't even know if it's meant to be funny, but it just really, really is. That just always makes me smile when I see that. There's a lot of stuff with Colin Farrell in this movie where he just really makes me laugh, like, because he is just so brilliantly over the top. Like, there's a bit, he's got like a target carved on his forehead, right? There's a bit where he just points at his forehead and goes, "Bullseye!" and then just disappears, right? It's just like so funny. It's just really, he's just really good in this as this kind of really wacky, over the top villain. And I think what's brilliant about him is he really kind of contrasts with Michael Clarke Duncan as the Kingpin. Michael Clarke Duncan is phenomenal as the Kingpin, while Colin Farrell is this kind of wacky, insane, kind of over the top comic book villain. Michael Clarke Duncan is playing this like he's in a straight gangster movie, like he's playing this so straight. He's playing this like he's in a serious, like, Martin Scorsese crime drama. He's like, he's like chewing on a cigar. He's in the suit, just full on badass. He's got the deep voice. He just exudes the kind of energy of just this badass crime lord, which is what the Kingpin is, right? And I think that's the correct way to play the Kingpin, you know? I think it doesn't do to do the Kingpin as this kind of over-the-top, wacky comic book villain. I think the more sort of like a real gangster you can play the Kingpin, the better he is as a villain. And I think the show does that really well as well. I think the Kingpin usually is pretty well cast, I will say, in both this and in the TV show. Michael Clarke Duncan, by the way, would also go on to voice the Kingpin in the CGI animated Spider-Man show, you know, the one that had Neil Patrick Harris in it as Spider-Man. He was really good in that too. That was a good show. Anyway, I think the contrast between, you know, Colin Farrell being this wacky, over-the-top comic book villain and Michael Clarke Duncan being, you know, just the kind of uber serious crime boss is just amazing. I think they're both great. There's a bit as well right at the end where Daredevil is coming to find the Kingpin. Like, Kingpin gets word that Bullseye has failed, and he says, "Send the guards home," and he starts taking off his suit, and, you know, he's like getting ready for a fight, and you're like, "Oh, I want to see this man fight Daredevil." You know, you believe that because you're like, "Oh, this man is so cool. I want to see him have a fist fight with Daredevil," and it's such a great scene. That scene gets me so hyped up for the fight, and I really like the fight scene as well. Which brings me to the other bit of casting that I really like, which is Ben Affleck as Daredevil. I really like Ben Affleck in this movie. He gets a lot of shit for this film, and I don't think he deserves it, because I really liked him. I think, you know, when he's Matt Murdock, he's really good. He's got the kind of subdued kind of sarcasm of Matt Murdock. But when he's in Daredevil mode, he's, you know, kind of this badass vigilante. He does it really, really well. You can see a lot of Batman in his Daredevil. You know, it's no surprise to me. It actually wasn't a surprise to me when Zack Snyder cast Ben Affleck as Batman for the DC movies, because I'm like, well, Ben Affleck has already done a very Batman-esque role when he played Daredevil. There was a lot of kind of Batman vibes to his Matt Murdock, especially in the scene where he goes to find the guy who's got away with you know, assaulting that woman right at the start, and he's in the bar and he's just kind of in the shadows. They look up, he goes, "What do you want?" And he goes, "Justice." And I'm like, oh, that is a Batman line. You are playing Batman at this point. This is not Matt Murdock anymore. You are doing a full-on Batman. It's great. That is one other thing, though, about this film, is right at the end, he doesn't kill the Kingpin, and he goes like, "I'm not the bad guy." I'm like, you shoved a man in front of a train earlier. Like, I know he was a bad man, he was not a nice guy, but you still pushed him in front of a train. Now you won't kill the Kingpin, who is like, you know, this kind of uber powerful, you know, crime lord. Okay, fine. But I feel like I'm nitpicking this movie a lot. I do really like it, but there's just a lot of goofy stuff in it. But for me, a lot of the goofy stuff adds to the charm, and yeah, I think it doesn't detract from Ben Affleck. He's really, really good in the film. Yeah, I think he's good. I actually kind of like his Daredevil costume. I understand people don't really like the way it looks, but I've always kind of dug his Daredevil costume. I think it's cool. Especially the mask. I really, really like the mask. Something else I really like how they show his, like, sonar vision that he has. Because, again, I'd not really had much experience with Daredevil as a character before seeing this film, but I knew that he kind of was blind and he used sound to find his way around, like sonar, like a bat almost. And I always wondered how they were going to do that, kind of show that visually. And I think it's really cool how they do it like a sonar thing. I think that's a really cool visual. Some of the effects are a little bit dated because, again, this is from 2003. But I think those effects are pretty good. I like the way they do that. And I like also how the sound design works, where there are times when you hear kind of bits of background noise being enhanced and stuff like that, just so you can sort of almost hear the same way that Daredevil hears. I really like the way they kind of put across, you know, this is how his superpowers work, this is how he sees, this is how, you know, he can pick up on things like sound and touch and all these other things. That's really, really interesting. So I think the actual so I think the way they sort of show his powers, and I think Ben Affleck in his performance, I think that's all really, really good. I like a lot of that. And also, this is just a really fun film. Like I say, some of it is dated. Again, 2 Evanescence songs in this, which is a very 2003 move. But I think, for me, the kind of the dated elements add to the charm of this in a way. I can see why they would put some people off, but to me, they add to the charm of the film. I have a wonderful time watching this every single time I watch it. I think The bad stuff doesn't bother me too much, with the exception of the park scene and, you know, some of the romance stuff. But yeah, overall, I really, really like Daredevil. I think, yes, there's some bad stuff in it, there's some goofy stuff in it. I think some of the goofy shit actually, you know, adds to the charm of this movie. You know, I think a lot of these kind of early 2000s superhero movies do have some dumb, goofy shit in them. You know, like, that's just part of what superhero movies were at the time, I guess. Even the better superhero movies, like I will never say a bad word against Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. I love that movie. There's some goofy stuff in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Deliberately so, but there is some goofy stuff. So I think, you know, some of the wacky stuff just kind of adds to the charm of this for me. I've always really liked it. I think Ben Affleck is good. I think Michael Clarke Duncan is inspired casting. Colin Farrell and Jon Favreau are also a lot of fun in it. And yeah, if you haven't seen this movie for a while, I would recommend checking it out. It's on Disney Plus and stuff like that if you don't want to get the physical copy. But yeah, I would recommend checking this out again because, you know, it's not a perfect movie, but it's nowhere near as bad as people say it is. It does not deserve all the hate that it gets. I've heard people say this is like the worst superhero movie of all time. Like, they made an Elektra movie after this that is way worse than this movie. So much worse than this. But yeah, I don't think it deserves to be quite as hated as it is. But let me know what you think about Daredevil 2003 down in the comments, whatever your thoughts are. Let's have a chat about it. Thanks so much for stopping by. That's all I've got for you today. I'll see you when I see you. Bye.